Synopsis of the books of the Bible. 1 Chronicles. By JND Darby. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. 2 Timothy 3 verses 16 and 17. Synopsis of the books of the Bible. By John Nelson Darby. 1 Chronicles, chapters 9 verse 35 to chapter 12. The ruin of Saul's house, Jehovah's establishment of David. A brief recital of the ruin of Saul's house introduces Jehovah's establishment of the house of David. All that took place before the people gathered themselves to David at Hebron, and before the kingdom was established in his house over all Israel at Jerusalem, is passed over in silence. The order of kingly power and the Davidic kingdom. After this we find, as a general subject, the order of the kingly power, and of the kingdom as established in the house of David, the kingdom, looked at as ordained of God in blessing, rather than a historical account of all that took place, excepting, so far as was necessary to furnish this picture. There is no perfection here, but there is the order which God appointed. The faults and the sufferings of David, whether before or after he was made the king, are consequently passed over in silence. The king and the strength and glory of his kingdom. After having mentioned the king himself, anointed by Samuel according to the word of Jehovah to rule over all Israel, the history begins with that which constituted the strength and glory of David's kingdom. The high priest no longer occupies the foreground. Jehovah's anointed is essentially a man of war, although it is not always to be so. Job and the mighty men who had been David's companions in arms come immediately after the king. The first place next to the king is his who delivered Zion out of the enemy's hands. See note, and this spot, chosen of Jehovah, becomes the city of David and the seat of royal power. We are then told how David's companions in arms successively joined him, though yet for a long time rejected and pursued by Saul, mean as yet in appearance, a fugitive and without power to resist. Note. David having built the city from Millo round about, Job repaired the rest of the city. We may observe that Shammah the Hararite is not mentioned here. Perhaps it is Shammah in 1 Chronicles 11 verse 27, but this is doubtful. See 2 Samuel 23 verse 25. It may also be observed that the exploits of these mighty men consisted especially of victories over the Philistines, the enemies by whom Saul, who had been raised up for the purpose of destroying them, was overcome. Whatever may have been their subsequent achievements, it was there they learned to conquer, and that they acquired the reputation which procured them a place in the archives of God. It is well that the reader should remember the connection between this whole history, and the establishment of the power of Christ, the Son of David, on the earth. End of note. David's companions. The first who are pointed out as having come to him, a proof that God and the knowledge of his will had more value in their eyes than parentage and the advantages which flow from thence, are from among the brethren of Saul, that is, of the tribe of Benjamin, and men of the greatest skill in handling the bow and the sling, the weapons with which Saul was slain in the battle in which he was overthrown. There were some who came from beyond Jordan to David, while he was still concealed in the wilderness, for faith and the manifestation of God's power tend to bring into play the energy and strength of those who connect themselves with it. He with whom God is attracts those with whom God is working, and their energy develops itself in proportion to the manifestation of his presence and favor. Many of these had been with Saul, but when with him they were not mighty men. Many also had never been with him. Yet even in Saul's camp, David had been able to slay the Philistines when all Israel was in terror. After that, similar achievements become almost common. At the beginning, such things required immediate communion with God, so as to shut out the influence of all that surrounded the man who enjoyed this communion. Afterwards, the surrounding influence was favorable, and, in this sense, faith propagates itself. These were but the chief of the mighty men whom David had. When God acts in power, he gives strength to the weak, and produces, by the energy of faith and of his spirit, an army of heroes. In those who came from Benjamin and Judah, we see that there was this link of faith. 1 Chronicles 12 verse 16. They knew that David's God helped him. David committed himself to God with respect to those who joined him, for he was in a very difficult position towards the end of his career of trial and affliction. Those to whom God had given energy and strength came to him in great numbers, for everything was ripe for his elevation to the throne of Israel, and for the transfer of Saul's kingdom to him. The various characteristics of God's army, but their one heart and object. There were various characteristics in this army of God, all famous for their valor. Some among them had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, and, in this case, all their brethren were at David's command. Others were armed for battle, others had all instruments for war, and were not of a double heart. And these things were according to the gift of God, and they all came with one heart to make David the king. Their brethren had prepared everything in abundance, for there was joy in Israel. It is always thus when Christ is really magnified by upright hearts who only seek his glory.